All right, let's get right into it. Today, we're opening up a truly fascinating historical document. And honestly, it reads remarkably like a planetary medical chart that we're going to impartially map out together. We're looking at Alice Bailey's 1947 text, Problems of Humanity. Written just after the absolute devastation of the Second World War, Bailey attempts to diagnose the underlying illnesses of our modern civilization. In this explainer, we're going to map out her post-war blueprint for the world. We'll examine the symptoms she identifies, the specific psychological ailments of different nations, and finally, her ultimate prescription for global recovery. Okay, let's dive into this. To really grasp Bailey's entire philosophy, we have to start with her core thesis on human greed. She argues that the root of all global conflict basically boils down to a deeply ingrained habit, the desire to take and not give. By failing to share resources, humanity has broken a fundamental law of nature, and that places us all in a state of active, shared culpability. This right here sets the foundation for absolutely everything that follows. To navigate this diagnosis, we'll follow a structured, unified thread connecting 5 distinct global topics. We've got 1. The disease of separativeness. 2. The psychology of nations. 3. Educating for world citizenship. 4. Capital, labor, and energy. And 5. Right human relations. Starting off with Section 1, the disease of separativeness. Because, before we can even think about treating our societal symptoms, the author insists we have to diagnose the underlying disease. Bailey defines this underlying illness as the sin of separateness. So what does this actually mean? Well, she describes it as an intense spirit of nationalism, a historical human habit of prioritizing material comfort and possessive greed way over global unity. Bailey neutrally asserts that this materialistic mindset, where nations literally just seek the best for themselves regardless of the cost to anyone else, is exactly what inevitably led to the devastating penalty of World War. To really connect this macro concept to our everyday understanding, the source material compares international geopolitics to human growth. Bailey argues that aggressive border disputes, clinging to ancient historical boundaries and shouting, "This is mine," are essentially immature, adolescent behaviors. It's kind of like kids fighting over toys in a nursery, right? Humanity has been acting out. The text suggests that mankind is finally growing up and must transition into mature, planetary responsibility. Let's move to and see how this builds in Section 2, the psychology of nations. This introduces the truly fascinating concept that nations actually act just like individual people. Bailey takes the idea of human psychology and scales it all the way up to the geopolitical level. The text treats global affairs fundamentally as a psychological problem. It suggests that every nation has a soul and a national thought form built up over centuries. What this means is that countries have their own deep-seated psychological complexes, historical traumas, and, frankly, massive egos that they must individually overcome to achieve true mental health on a global stage. Look at how she brilliantly balances the global scales here to illustrate this impartial critique. She points out the United States' psychological flaw of adolescent experimentation, but then highlights its innate idealism and potential for worldwide responsibility. She notes Great Britain's aloof caste system, yet contrasts it with its potential for paternal justice. She critiques Germany's historical extreme negativity and regimentation, while recognizing its deep roots in mysticism and group consciousness. Russia is called out for its dictatorial isolation, but positioned as a future custodian of true brotherhood. And France's materialistic intellect is weighed against its potential to reveal the human soul. The takeaway? Every nation has intense house cleaning to do, but every single nation also has a vital spiritual contribution to make. Which brings us to Section 3, Educating for World Citizenship. To fix the future, the author diagnoses that we have to start by fixing the systemic failures within our schools. He argues that our traditional education systems have profoundly failed us. Why? Because they teach children to compete and conquer rather than to cooperate. Think about traditional history lessons for a second. They're so often just a timeline of aggression. They glorify warriors and conquests, fuel aggressive national pride, and foster a highly competitive, separative spirit. By systematically ignoring world citizenship, Bailey argues, our schools have just been silently laying the groundwork for war. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how Bailey transforms these abstract theories into a highly concrete, 3-tier educational curriculum. Notice the progression here. From ages 4 to 12, the focus is civilization, teaching right social relations and true world history, not just nationalistic victories. Then from 12 to 18, it shifts to culture, instilling the larger values of art, literature, and practical ideals. And finally, from 18 to 25, the university years focus heavily on world citizenship, teaching international synthesis and the application of abstract truths to real global problems. Let's pivot now to Section 4, Capital, Labor, and Energy. We've arrived at the economic crossroads, framing a true clash of titans over the world's resources. Bailey offers a very sharp, strictly objective dual critique of the major economic forces here. On one side, capital is explicitly called out for its selfish exploitation, its history of cornering planetary resources, and prioritizing the love of money for corporate gain over human well-being. But labor definitely isn't spared either. While acknowledging the labor movement as a vital, highly necessary protective uprising for the masses, she warns that it now risks becoming a dictatorial tyranny itself, driven by incredibly ambitious leaders using threat and force. And this brings us to a really fascinating narrative pause. Writing right at the dawn of the atomic age, Bailey asks a striking question. If science continues its march, what happens when atomic energy and automated machines replace the need for grueling human labor entirely? Her bold prediction, which honestly sounds remarkably like our modern debates over AI and automation today, is that atomic energy is a scientific triumph that will fundamentally disrupt the old economic system. As boundless energy strips power from the moneyed interests who previously controlled coal and oil, she argues the future challenge won't actually be unemployment. Instead, it'll be the constructive use of human leisure. We'll literally be freed to creatively manage our own time. Moving into Section 5, Right-Human Relations. After thoroughly diagnosing the global disease, we have finally arrived at the author's ultimate prescription. So, the crucial point is this actionable blueprint for transitioning into a cooperative society. To achieve what Bailey calls right human relations, society has to substitute sharing for competitive greed. We must actively dismantle barriers of prejudice and race. We need to elect international leaders who are motivated by practical goodwill rather than just nationalistic ambition. And above all, we must acknowledge the factual reality of the one humanity, this idea that the world is a single interconnected organism. But to actually achieve this blueprint, Bailey brings us back to a very old, very familiar quote you've probably heard 1,000 times. The love of money is the root of all evil. She insists that until society overcomes this fundamental weakness of material desire, the absolute root of our sin of separateness, this cooperative blueprint is going to remain just a fantasy. Which leaves us right here. Bailey's 1947 text acts as a powerful mirror held up to our present-day global choices. She firmly believed that the release of new scientific energies and the sheer exhaustion of war would eventually force humanity to make a choice. So, are we heading toward mutual destruction, allowing old habits of separativeness and greed to run the show? Or will we embrace right human relations and educate ourselves into a golden age of shared resources and planetary maturity? It's a profound question from the past, and it demands an answer from our future.